What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Tribal Council podcast, where on this podcast, Survivor represents our life, and when it gets canceled, so do we. And, it's the off season. We're recording this before the finale airs, though, so we don't technically know who wins or who comes in second, third, fourth, fifth place. But we're still excited to find out, and we're excited to start on our off season series. So to quickly explain what's going on, we're going to be ranking every New Era player within their placement. So this video will be ranking the 18th placers. And it'll just be me, Ethan Kronk, and my co-host Connor Boudreau. How are you
Hello,
doing
hello.
today, Connor?
Doing pretty snazzy. Down a bottle of Mountain Dew because we are recording this probably 4, 5 hours, maybe 3 hours after we planned. So, you know, I'm ready to go. Excited.
Hell yeah. And 18th place. It's the last place you want to come in. It's the last um situation you want to find yourself in. And generally speaking, if you find yourself in 18th place, there's probably a reason. But that being said, there are definitely certain 18th placers that deserved their poor placement more than others. And we're going to talk about right at the gate, a player who definitely deserved 18th place. But before we do, just to sort of talk about our methodology for these rankings, since the new era has started, I've been ranking players within their placement already. And so me and Connor kind of just sat down and discussed my rankings, talked about what, I might change upon further consideration, talked about what Connor might change, given his perspective, and just sort of adjusted things to try to create a ranking that as closely resembles both me and Connor's opinions as possible. So these rankings might not necessarily perfectly represent either of our opinions, but it'll give you a pretty good idea, and I think that they're pretty solid rankings. But one thing that we very much both agreed on was in ninth place, Hannah Rose. And I'll let Connor take the stage to talk about Hannah.
Yeah, one thing that was heavily considered when we were ranking players, we're both of the ideology to an extent, if not entirely, that quitting the game of Survivor is just inherently one of the worst things that can come from your game. Uh, Not only does Hannah quit the game of Survivor, she forces her way out at Tribal after playing a pretty bad game and is already in the conversation to be booted regardless of quitting. Like, her tribe isn't on the Hannah train. And then she's like, well, you know what, guys? I don't have to be voted out if I don't want to be here. Which, again, just why did you sign up if you don't want to be on Survivor? What was the point?
Yeah. Well, and on 90% of Survivor tribes, I think Hannah would be the first boot, but she ends up on Lulu tribe, where they have Emily, who on a lot of seasons also might have been the first boot. Brandon, who on season 45 probably would have been the first boot. Or I mean, it would have been between him and Emily, um, if Hannah hadn't quit, and that's kind of crazy. That says a lot about the tribe that she was put on, that she wasn't going to be the first boot. But on 90% of tribes, I think she is, considering just her attitude about the game, her general just weakness around camp, and she ends up quitting. And the way that it's portrayed is that it's in large part due to the fact that she misses her vape, which has to be one of the most ridiculous reasons that anyone has ever quit the show. Um, I mean, I get it. Addiction is a whole thing, and withdrawals are not fun. But you want to talk about withdrawals? Survivor Panama. I mean, how long did Shane go without a cigarette? And that guy was smoking 2 packs a day. I don't think Hannah's smoking 2 packs a day. I mean, she's not smoking cigarettes. She's vaping, but I don't think she's going through 2 packs of cigarettes worth of nicotine a day. And she can't handle 2 days out there without nicotine. Um, I don't know. It's just uh, pathetic is maybe a strong word, but it is a word that comes to mind, and for all those reasons, Hannah has to place ninth here. There just wasn't really much discussion otherwise, I don't think. That being said, do you want to take the floor for announcing our eighth place player?
Yeah, next up is another person who, although doesn't technically quit, kinda does quit. Jackson, to start it off in the kindest way possible, I don't know what the plan was. If he required some kind of medical assistance,
Him.
like yeah, like if he requires lithium for his condition currently for his health, like if there's any kind of reason that he would require something he's not allowed, what the plan was in going through the entire process and saying, "Nope, I'm good to show up," showing up, going through everything, and just be like, "Well, actually, I kind of can't be here right now." Like to me, that's a little disappointing because a why didn't they like why didn't Jackson come to the point of like, okay, obviously I shouldn't do this. You know, it's someone else's place to be here and I can't be here. Or option B, wait until that was an option. Find a way to make this a possibility. Talk to production and go, okay, obviously this is something I'm currently dealing with, but maybe 5 years from now I won't be dealing with this. And you guys wanted to cast me now anyway. So like it's not something that can be possible now. They'll come back to him because it's a risk that people might have to take if you have a health condition. But again, what was the point? What was the effort for, if not to get something out of it? And there was just no world where he was getting something out of this.
I want to preface this by saying that like I love Jackson for the short time he was on our screens. I thought he seemed like a phenomenal person, um, a really inspiring person with a really interesting story. But the whole lithium thing is just really unfortunate. Like he thought that he could wean himself off of it before Survivor started. He wasn't able to fully do that. He thought he could go cold turkey, but he didn't disclose this information to medical until the last second, and they couldn't find a way to let him play the game because lithium is no joke. It's not a drug that you can just go cold turkey on, right? And I mean, he was prescribed it for medical reasons as well. So it's not a recreational thing. Going cold turkey on medication that's been prescribed to you for mental health reasons is just never really a good idea. Um, and you know, when it's a drug that's as serious as lithium, um, not to put a stigma around it, because obviously it's something that a lot of people require, and it's fine if you're on lithium, but you you really can't just go cold turkey on something like that. It's not it's not it's a bit of a heavy duty drug, and when you're dehydrated and starving and mentally probably not in the best position on Survivor, that just exasperates all those issues. So I guess the reason why I have Jackson ranked so low is just that he essentially lost the game before it started. He wasn't going to be able to realistically play the game, and and he kind of knew that. So, uh-oh, what's going on? Why is Connor typing? Hello?
Well, it wasn't
Oh,
intentional. I misclicked.
oh, I thought something happened with like I don't know. I thought I like completely cut out or something.
Nope. Just accidentally clicked the E button instead of the button I was trying to click.
Ah, yeah. So basically, long story short, Jackson was never really going to be able to play. He kind of lost the game before he started, and he kind of knew that, I think. So for that reason, I have him down here, but it's kind of hard to rank Jackson to begin with. It's kind of almost tempting to just not include him in the rankings and say, like, look, his situation is one that we're probably never going to see again on Survivor. It's certainly one that we've never seen before. Um, but at the end of the day, I did decide to put him here just given the circumstances and the fact that he was never going to have a chance to make it any further in the game than he did. That being said, we move on to our 7th place contestant. And here I have another player who goes home in an unconventional way, Bruce Peralt. And to kind of touch on the reasons why I have Bruce down here, first of all, he's medically evacuated day 1, day 2, before the first immunity challenge even happens, I believe. He cracks his head open in the opening reward challenge. He was being reckless. This is something that we kind of get confirmation of a little bit in season 45, where he is constantly injuring himself due to his recklessness. This isn't a situation that he learns from particularly. And so that's already a knock against him, right? His medical evacuation can already be sort of held against him in a sense that it wasn't just a complete freak accident. He was probably being reckless, and that led to an injury that you couldn't continue the game with. But on top of that, season 45, we get a pretty good indication of who Bruce is as a person, and I just don't think that he would have gone along with this Tika tribe at all. I don't think he would have made it particularly far in the first place. I mean, Helen, Sarah, Carolyn, I don't see him getting along with any of the women on that tribe. I don't really see him getting along with Jam Jam. I don't see him being besties with Carson. I mean, I'm sure Carson is somebody who he could form a relationship with, but at the end of the day, I just don't see Bruce making it past the first vote anyways. So the fact that I just don't see much potential for Bruce to go far, and then he gets medically evacuated due to his own recklessness, there just isn't really much else to say about Bruce. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well. I didn't see a ton of potential in Bruce in either of his appearances. Unfortunately, just his style of play doesn't really tend to mesh well with a lot of people in the more modern and new era of Survivor. And again, in all honesty, you played one day of Survivor. We can't really rank you that highly. You know, he gets the credit of didn't quit and didn't lose before he showed up, but I mean, he kind of lost as he showed up. So, you know, at least he's not last in this placement of last place finishers.
And I mean, we did talk in our discussions about these rankings about a scenario where Bruce is kept around for challenge strength, but as we'll get into with our next player, challenge strength, when your social game is really not very good, might not end up mattering. And I think that's a good segue into Eric Abraham, the first boot of the new era as a whole. Um, the first player on this list who goes home to a vote, and I think it says a lot that he was clearly a physical asset to that tribe. I mean, he's pretty well built. He seemed to be, strong as an ox, hardworking. Got shit done around camp for sure. But that sort of ends up being his downfall. Is he's very demanding. He's not really playing the social game, and he rubs a lot of his tribe the wrong way. At the end of the day, it comes down to when you're that much of an asset and you still go home because your social game is that poor, that's the mark of a pretty terrible Survivor player in my eyes. But do you have anything to say about Abraham?
Yeah, I think the determining factors between him being slightly higher, slightly lower can be boiled down to a couple things. He did at least get to a vote, which when we were discussing, was the entire factor between him not being lowered. Because again, at the end of the day, he actually got to a process where he had to play in the shortest possible fashion the entire game of Survivor. He got to a immunity challenge, he got to a tribal council, he got to votes. Something that Hannah, Jackson, and Bruce in his first season, none of those 3 players got. However, when your social game is just that poor and strategy isn't developed and alliances aren't formed, you can't be taken that highly in terms of your perception to overcome, again, the fact that he clearly wasn't a good player. So he slots into this spot for many reasons and can't really be moved up, but as far as our opinion is, can't be moved any further down.
Yeah. Now in 5th place we have a player who we did actually consider moving up a spot. 5th and 4th place we did debate about a little bit, but ultimately we landed on Nicole Mazzullo in 5th place for these first boots. And Nicole is kind of not a particularly interesting first boot to talk about because the main reason she goes up first is that she just doesn't particularly play the game early on. It doesn't seem like she doesn't really form strong bonds with anyone. She doesn't really contribute that much in the challenges. She doesn't really seem to do all that much to save herself. Like, I don't know, like what is there really to say about Nicole and her game?
I mean, some of the big things that you can mention in terms of her game is that unfortunately, she had probably more comical moments than really game defining moments, and ultimately just didn't seem to really gel. Didn't seem to really get in the strategy of the season, and didn't really get an opportunity to develop a game. So it's really hard to see what Nicole could have been, given that what we saw of Nicole was not very promising. At the end of the day, we do see that she wasn't such a socially incapable player that she was forced to be voted out. Like, it wasn't like a tribe said, "Oh, we have to get rid of Nicole." It was more like yeah, we're going to get rid of Nicole, which, is why Nicole ends up in the middle of our rankings.
So between her 2 biggest moves of the season, projectile vomiting on, I think it was Alex, and spitting water into Jeremiah's eyes, which of the 2 do you think benefited her game the most?
I mean, one of them is a sanitary concern that is completely gross and disgusting. The other did, however, allow her teammate to see how badly her tribe was losing that challenge. So honestly, I'm going to go with the vomiting.
There you go. You heard it here first, guys. Projectile vomiting, best move of the season, actually. Um, 4th place, we have the man, the myth, the legend, the monster, David Jelinski. Um, obviously, there's an urge to put him in severalth place, but his game was a little bit better than Bruce's. Jelinski is an interesting player to talk about because he's obviously kind of a joke in the Survivor community. People hear Jelinski's name and they go, that was the guy that just absolutely fucking sucked on Survivor 46 and got voted out because he sucked. And that's kind of how I think of Jelinski, as much as entertaining as he was. But then when I consider his game in comparison to some of these other first boots, I think there's actually something to be said for Jelinski. He finds himself in a majority alliance early on with Kenzie, Tiffany, and Q. And it's a real alliance that seriously plans on moving forward as a strong four. He volunteers for the Sweat versus Savvy challenge. He ends up quitting that challenge, reps Q the wrong way. He's picked to go on a journey, ends up making probably the correct decision, um, but sells it terribly to his tribe. And at a certain point, his tribe's just like, hey, you know what? Actually, this guy kind of This guy kind of sucks. This guy kind of stinks. And he does have the Abraham downside of being a genuine um, asset in challenges and still being voted out so early. But there are just positives to his game, which isn't something that I can say about any of the 5 people that we have placed below him. So, Connor, you were a little bit lower on Jelinski. You even talked about potentially putting him below Nicole. So I'd love to hear your perspective on Jelinski's game overall.
Yeah, the big thing that really comes to mind for me is, as you mentioned, a majority alliance. I don't know how much I can value a majority alliance that lasts less than a single tribal council round, because to me it's almost laughable that that's like one of the big assets of his game. It's like, dude, you couldn't make it 2 days before these people that were set on working with you decided, yeah, he's got to go. And to me, that just speaks to, again, Abraham levels of social gameplay, where it's just like, you couldn't have done much worse. However, at the end of the day, we did at least see him make those strategic connections. We did at least see him make those social plays to get himself in that position in the first place. So, completely understandable to me to move him above players like Abraham and Nicole. And the one thing that really sets him up over those two, I would argue, is the fact that he does at least have a couple different tools in his arsenal, in terms of he is somewhat capable of challenges, somewhat capable of social gameplay, and somewhat capable of strategic gameplay. So he at least displayed a certain level of all of those things, even if he does completely blow them all up in one round of Survivor.
I'll go so far as to say I don't think Jelinski is the worst player on his tribe. I don't even think he's the second worst player on his own tribe. Um, he might not even be the third worst player on his own tribe, quite frankly. There's only really 2 good players on that tribe, in the grand scheme of things. But he is a pretty bad player. He does portray some pretty significant weaknesses that just make it hard to imagine him going particularly far in any given season. But his strengths outweigh those of Nicole, Abraham, Bruce, Hannah, and I suppose Jackson, though I do think if Jackson got the opportunity to actually play the game, he'd have maybe he'd maybe be a lot higher on this list or on a different list entirely. But yeah, that's sort of what places Jelinski here. Is he's the first candidate that really has any sort of positives to his game, but he is still much more negative than the 3 players we have remaining to talk about. So that being said, in third place, we have John Lovett. So a quick recap of John's game. He finds himself a little bit on the outs early on. He's not really able to form the bonds that he thinks he's forming, but he does form a pretty strong connection with Andy. Unfortunately, Andy proves to be the wrong person to form a connection with. At the immunity challenge, he has a bit of a breakdown. He ends up throwing John under the bus, despite being John's closest ally. And this just kind of completely throws John into a very strange situation. He has to sort of trust the women that they're planning on targeting Andy, but he doesn't, so he tries to target Annika instead, but Annika ends up being the wrong person to target because she has a really close relationship with Rachel. She has a pretty close relationship with Sierra, And even Sam is not on the Annika train. He's more interested in targeting Andy, and just essentially John overplays his hand in a situation where he doesn't have a lot to work with, and he goes home because of it. And I do think I don't think he displays as many negatives as Jelinski. I think he displays a pretty similar amount of positives, and so that places him just above Jelinski. But I see more potential in his game. Honestly, I do think that there are worlds in which maybe he finds a tribe that he gels with a little bit more, and he's able to make it a bit further. But what do you think? You seemed a bit lower on John's game when you were talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think we could move him down any, but I just thought that the outcome in which John survives tribal doesn't leave me confident that he could continue to survive long in the game. Because the biggest takeaway we got from him being eliminated is that he couldn't develop relationships that great to begin with. And then when he finally gets one, it's a bad one, bad break, but not the end of the world because he has someone that he can get rid of, but he overplays his hand. And when someone makes that big of a overplay early, it's typically not something that someone survives from and goes long in the game and has a successful winning game. Very seldomly does someone even make an overplay at all of that magnitude and make it to the merge. So it's just something that I looked at and was like, I don't know that I can say this guy was one of the best 18th placers and really put him too high. However, we are talking about 18th placers, so I thought third place pretty fitting of John's game.
Yeah, now we come to our top two, which I feel like Connor kind of felt like the top two was a little bit more of um a distinct group, whereas for me it was kind of like second, third place was its own block, and then first place was sort of far and away the best. But we came to an agreement on this. Mariah Young in second place on this list. Um, do you want to quickly sort of run through Mariah's game?
Yeah, Mariah does kind of have a situation somewhat similar in the sense that she gets targeted pretty early on from an overplay. I would say that's one of the big takeaways that you can come from that. However, unfortunately for her, she doesn't have the same starting point where she doesn't really make that connection. And I think that's the biggest thing you can say with Mariah is people make the big connections around her and doesn't really leave her much opportunity to do so. Unfortunately for her, she targets probably even I would say probably a little bit better than John, but unfortunately just still doesn't make a good connection with the decision and it doesn't really come across well with the group. But at the end of the day, I think the scrambling was also a little bit better than John's. I think that there was at least some thought that Mariah played a decent social game. And I think there was a couple of elements of like, at least Mariah didn't show a negative that we could really cling on to define what we'd expect had they survived the tribal.
Yeah, so for Mariah, I mean, she tries to form this women's alliance. The other women on the Baka tribe seem to be like somewhat for it, but when push comes to shove, she doesn't deliver in the challenge. She's viewed as the weakest member, and I'll go so far as to say I don't think that she necessarily was the weakest member on that tribe. I think that basing tribe strength on the performance of one challenge is already kind of a bit of you're kind of counting your chickens before they hatch, maybe a little bit premature. But she gets targeted for that. She tries to put the target on Owen. I think it's the wrong person to put the target on. I get it. Owen was definitely a bit of a social pariah. He wasn't forming the bonds that he needed to be forming, and I could see a world where Owen ends up going home there, but I do think Gabler would have been a much smarter person to maybe try to put the target on. Either way, the Women's Alliance doesn't work out for her. She clearly didn't contribute enough to her tribe for people to want to keep her around. And in another world, that Women's Alliance sticks together. They pull in Sammy, they vote out Gabler, or they vote out Owen, and then maybe Mariah actually makes it decently far. But unfortunately, it's just a few different factors where I don't think she forms strong enough bonds with Ellie and Janine. I don't think she puts the target on quite the right person. And that sort of is what's holding her back from the number one spot. But as far as first boots go, I don't think Mariah's a terrible player at all. Um, that being said, in first place, process of elimination should be easy to guess. We have Stephanie Berger, the first boot of Survivor 48. I just think that she gets a bad break. I think she's put on a bad tribe, and I sometimes that's just what happens. I think that she forms probably the strongest relationship that anybody on this list forms, in terms of her relationship with Mary. I think that she attempts to put the target on probably the right person for her to put the target on and Say. Unfortunately, Say just has a little bit more power in this tribe than you would expect Say to have on a given tribe. Um, Unfortunately, she's put on a tribe with players like Cedric who make kind of baffling decisions. And she's voted out for a reason that's just kind of like, it doesn't really make much sense. Like, oh, she doesn't want to play this game as hard as Say does. That's essentially why she's targeted initially. And then um, she doesn't win the puzzle for her tribe. Again, it's like, I go back to like, why are we basing someone's entire value on one challenge? It's just very narrow-minded in my opinion. I think Stephanie more than anyone is the most baffling person here to even be a first boot. I think the reasons for her going home weren't necessarily fair. I think that she ends up on a tribe where somehow Say is holding the most amount of power, and I just don't think that Say is a player who on most given tribes is going to have a lot of power. She's a very strong personality, a very unpredictable player. Um, so I don't know. I think Stephanie gets a really bad break, but I think I've been going on a little bit too long about her. I'll give Connor an opportunity to share his thoughts.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I would say that you can take away that isn't just like repeating the same information here is most of these players either go home before a vote or in a unanimous vote. Stephanie doesn't. Stephanie doesn't even cast her own vote, and it's not unanimous. So Stephanie clearly had the ability to make a really, really good run at the game in a social situation perspective. In almost any other season, Stephanie at least goes to the merge and maybe ends up on the wrong side of the numbers and goes out. Or is maybe like the last boot before a merge, where the tribe just realizes she has way too much ability to run the game. But in specifically this season, we find one of the worst alliances ever, one of the worst tribes ever, and I would say of the new era, arguably the worst of both. Because we watch a Power 4 completely crumble.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Stephanie just is the stray bullet that starts things off before that alliance completely falls to pieces. We unfortunately watch Stephanie go home because of a challenge that I wouldn't even say is entirely lost because of Stephanie. You know, bad performance, sure. But like when you're looking at it from the total complete perspective, Stephanie kind of just ends up on the wrong season, wrong alliance, wrong place, wrong time. And in most other situations, Stephanie is at least a mid game player, right? At least gets through 3 or 4 tribals. And I mean, on her tribe, maybe she only ends up going a couple tribal, sorry. But that's a very weird situation. We have such an astronomically bad tribe that just gets absolutely butchered, and they just keep making the wrong decision after wrong decision. So clearly, there's some reasons that tribe doesn't work out. I don't know if keeping Stephanie would have, fixed it, but at the end of the day, she ends up in a pretty poor situation, and not because of trying, completely just deciding to take a pretty solid approach most of the time, and it just wrong season.
Well, I think what really exemplifies this is like, of all the players here, having seen their preseason stuff, getting to know them as players and understanding who they are, Stephanie's the only person who, if you had told me before the season started she was going to be the first boot, I would have been like particularly surprised, right? Hannah, absolutely, I could see it. Jackson, I mean, that's a very different situation, I guess. But Bruce, sure. Abraham, yeah, his personality is just kind of abrasive. Nicole, 100%. Jelinski, maybe a little bit surprised, but still. John, again, maybe a little bit surprised, but still not terribly. Mariah, not terribly surprised. Stephanie, though, I'd be shocked. I'd be like, really? She's the first boot? Like, there wasn't somebody on her tribe who's a little bit weaker in challenges, who was a little bit less socially adept, like who was a little bit less well insulated. I don't think that Stephanie is particularly bad at challenges. I don't think that she is particularly socially inept. I think she just finds herself in a situation where she's on a tribe with the worst possible person for her to be on a tribe with, right? Her approach to the game and Say's approach to the game are just so drastically different. But even then, on so many different tribes, I think that Stephanie wins out over Say, but not this one. And it's just a series of unfortunate events. It's really baffling to me that she ended up being the first boot, and for that reason, I think she has to be the best first boot of the new era. But I don't know if that's a badge that she'll wear with honor. I hope it is, but it's just I think she's far and away the best first boot of the new era. I don't think that there was ever really much question in my mind, and yeah, that sort of makes the list. So to recap, we have in first place Stephanie, then Mariah, John, Jelinski, Nicole, Abraham, Bruce, Jackson, and then in last place we have Hannah. Um, I think it's a pretty eclectic group of people. I think honestly, in the new era, we've had some pretty entertaining premieres with some pretty memorable first boots. So it was fun to talk about this group of players and sort of take a look back at their games and compare and contrast. Do you have anything to add on to before we end the video here for the first episode of the series?
Not too much, but yeah, it's always interesting to go back and look at the placements of players, go over some of the weaker players of seasons. And to me, it was kind of interesting that these players could kind of lumped into three different categories, even still, considering the fact that, again, these were all people that came last place. But yet there's still a decent amount of diversity, which I think is something that's a little bit less repeatable for the next video, but you'll have to come back and see.
Yeah, no, we're probably gonna record the next episode right after cutting the recording for this one. So, um, but for you guys, you'll have to wait a few days. I think it's gonna be a great video, though. I hope this was a good episode. I think we're still kind of finding our footing in terms of doing this style of content, but that being said, I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you look forward to the next episode. And I hope you're enjoying the off season and getting excited for season 50 in a couple months here. But at the end of the day, that's all we really have to say. So the pod has spoken.